I'm joined by Victoria Rush. No woman, no try. Rugby. This is, you played rugby, you're supporting rugby, you've made a film about rugby. Why rugby, Victoria? Why rugby? What inspired you to get involved in rugby?
I think the first time I really got involved with rugby was probably my dad. He loved it. He loved kind of shouting at the TV and supporting the boys. But when I got to kind of playing age, it wasn't available for girls. And I didn't find my first female rugby team until I was 19 years old when I got to university. But I'll say that I just found a safe space for somebody who's maybe a little bit more physical in sport and wasn't as good at the traditional women's sports that I was given at school. So when I found a sport like rugby where I...
Cheers, by the way.
Cheers.
Welcome to the programme.
Where I had a community of people who had the same kind of approach to sport as I did, I never went back, safe to say.
And tell us about this film, No Woman, No Try. Is this to attempt to popularise female rugby?
It was an attempt to put female rugby players in the spotlight. I think is something that we don't get very often. Women's football, as you see it now during the Euros, is getting a great spotlight.
And they're getting big crowds.
Yeah, they are. There's 460,000 tickets, I think they've sold, the biggest ever Women's Euros.
Would you have believed that 5 or 10 years ago?
5 or 10 years ago, no, but only because I didn't see women's sport as a professional opportunity, where it is now. The next generation of girls growing up can see sport as a professional choice for them. Rugby, I think, is not quite there yet, but hopefully.
Well, you say that,
soon.
but is it true we're the only country in the world to have a female rugby union?
A league for the women's teams, yeah, the club league.
So we're way ahead of others in some ways.
We are way ahead.
So it's not all bad.
The Red Roses are going to the World Cup this year, and well, in my personal opinion, they're front runners. But I think most people who know anything about the women's game would agree, because of the league that we have, because of the setup we have here, we're definitely the best team in the world.
So there's an option now to be a professional female rugby player.
Just about. There's only 28 professional female rugby players in England.
Yeah, you see, I mean, men's rugby didn't go professional till, what, the late 80s, early 90s?
Yep.
Comparatively recently, and actually for the first few years, it was very difficult for many men to earn a living playing rugby. But do you see this growing?
Definitely. The RFU have pledged $222 million to the women's game over the next 10 years. That inherently will create professional sport for women's rugby, and hopefully we'll see many more of the best players on TV, not just during the games, but in films, in other types of content, and that's really, I think, how we grow the game.
So we got women's rugby, we got obviously the football at the moment, which is very much in the news, the cricket, women's cricket, and, you know, I mean, let's be honest, the women's female team's been a lot better than the men's team over the course of the last few years. Although this season English male cricket has picked up hugely. Do you think there's a public out there that feel that maybe women's sport's being sort of pushed upon them, whether they want it or not? Or do you think people are genuinely warming to it?
I think you could say that about men's sport. Surely it's pushed upon all of us to watch it,
and we
don't have the option.
Because we've grown up with it.
Women's sport, exactly. Right. But I think the audience is out there. I just don't think we've ever given them a product to be able to prove that the audience is there. Some people want to watch it, some people don't. And that's okay. You don't have to watch women's sport. I don't have to watch men's sport. I don't particularly like men's football. I do like women's football.
What's wrong with men's football? Oh, come on.
Oh, come on.
This is a very anti-male stance you're taking.
It's definitely not. No, I love men's rugby. I enjoy watching cricket. I'm not a massive fan of men's football, and I think that's got a lot to do with the lack of respect I feel I see in the game towards like referees, like fans towards players. I just think women's sport's a safer space for families, for fans, for players. So that's
a safer space. What does that mean?
Well, I went to the Women's Euros opening game. There were families, kids, a lot more women I think I've ever seen at a men's football match, and I just think it is a safer environment to have a different audience.
Because men's football's quite tribal.
It can be, yeah, definitely. And I don't think you'd see as many kids at a men's football match as you would see it as a women's football match. And that's a different audience. Doesn't mean to say it has to change. I'm not saying you have to change the men's game, but for brands, for businesses, for growth, it's a totally different audience and a totally different market. There's nothing wrong with that.
When it comes, I mean, you know, we all know with sport, and there have been dramatic changes in terms of, you know, what I'm talking about the male game to begin with. But when you look at cricketers, for example, what they can now earn, they can go off, the really top ones can go to India, to the IPL, and make very, very big money. Even Test cricketers earn a pretty good living. They didn't used to. You know, it wasn't a very well-paid game. footballers, I mean, goodness me, you know, I've had a few well-known footballers on this show, you know, who were Premier League players in the early days of the Premier League and big names in English football, but they were earning, I mean, literally a fraction of what these footballers are earning today. So I guess in the end, it's all about TV rights, isn't it? In the end, that's where the big funding for sport comes from. You know, we pay to watch sport. You know, we subscribe to various commercial sports channels, or we pay to watch a boxing match, or we pay to watch the Open Golf Championship at the weekend, or whatever it may be. And I've heard, certainly around tennis, but I think the principle applies through all sports, I've heard the argument made by proponents of female sport that it's unfair that women aren't paid the same as the men. Is it unfair?
I think that's a big question. I think it depends. I don't think it necessarily should be the same, but it should be equal for working, for the work that they're doing. So, I mean, I think we all probably agree men's football is paid an obscene amount of money, right? It's ridiculous. You almost can't spend that much money. You can try, at least.
Well, I think
I'm sure they're all giving it a go.
I think they do,
definitely.
Yeah.
But some of the women, even playing in London teams, can be paid, what, £20,000 to £30,000 a year. That's realistically barely a living wage in London. So if you want to call it being paid equally rather than being paid the same.
But isn't it about market forces? I mean, isn't the truth of it, and it may happen, you know, maybe this World Cup, this European Championship, maybe this is the beginning in terms of football. It may come to rugby and cricket and who knows. But isn't it in the end about market forces? You know, if more people are prepared, you know, to spend their subscriptions on sport and to click on to women's sport, they will then earn the same as the men.
I'm sure, yeah.
We shouldn't force this, should we?
No, you shouldn't, but you need to create a product for people to watch it, for them to then earn the money, right? If we're not putting it on TV, we're not putting it on all these different channels.
It's not easy to find, actually, is it?
It's really hard to find.
No, listen, I'm trying to play devil's advocate on this.
Definitely.
You know, and yes, if I've been... You know, I do subscribe to Sky Sports. I can't help it because I'm a sports nut and I love watching sport and I love the Open at the weekend and I'll watch all sports that are on. But yeah, you certainly wouldn't flicking through the Sky channels kind of automatically.
So until you can find it, until you normalise seeing it, it's not going to be watched, there's not going to be an audience, and then you get stuck in this cycle of you can't watch it, there's no audience, there's no money in it. Once you can watch it, it'll get better, there'll be more money in it, it'll get even better, and that cycle will improve upwards. I think until we're making it available, the rugby's been on the BBC, and it's been on the TV, and it's been free to air TV. That's a huge change. You can now watch women's rugby, whereas you couldn't really before. You really struggle.
Yeah, I mean, this is another big debate, isn't it? What's free to air and what you have to pay for, and I do regret that cricket, of course, is all behind a paywall because the way the England team have played this summer, millions would have watched it. But I was the one comment you made that really interested me because, you know, here you are, you took up rugby, you love the game, you're an enthusiast, you're out there promoting women's sport as a whole, but rugby in particular. And I get that, and I love the enthusiasm for that. But there's one comment you made earlier that really interested me. You said that when you were at school, you were directed to what was thought to be sports for girls, basically.
Definitely.
What did you just explain what you meant by that?
Well, I played hockey, netball and rounders. I mean, I believe rounders have been taken off the curriculum for girls now anyway because there is no pathway and they do play cricket, which is fantastic, and that'll be a huge growth for cricket later. But
hockey's a great game.
Hockey's a great game, and the boys were allowed to play it when we got a little bit older, but the girls weren't allowed to play rugby or football. They weren't given the same options to play a different type of sport that's inherently not necessarily seen as a female-only sport. And so I lost 15 years compared to my male counterpart. By the time I was 18 and started playing, he's probably been playing since he was 3 or 4.
So do we need to encourage girls to play sport more?
Different types of sport, definitely.
Boxing?
Yes, why not?
Well, a lot of people, of course, don't like sports like that.
True.
So you think there is a difference? Is that fair or unfair? There's
a difference.
But how many young women would really want to play rugby or would really want to box? How
do you know until you give them the option?
And is it closed off to them?
Well, what definitely was for me, and it's certainly not as easily available as things like hockey, netball, cricket. as it's on the curriculum. Rugby is not on the curriculum.
And cricket's a big change, isn't it?
Cricket's a huge change, I think a great change.
And what
I'd
about
love to play cricket.
And what about the differences between, because I've discussed this with other sports people that have been on this show, both male and female. You know, people have been Olympic performers and whatever. One of the things that I see with sport, and I don't know whether it's as relevant with girls as it is with boys, but I'm sure it is the 7% of kids that go to the private schools have the best coaching, the best facilities, the most encouragement, and not all, but too many who are being educated in the state sector are not getting proper access to sport.
Yeah, agreed. Rugby's definitely got that problem. If you don't have access to grass areas with rugby posts, are you going to take up rugby, or are you going to end up taking up football? Because it's much easier to access.
But is rugby a middle-class game for rich kids?
It is in this country, definitely. I'd say it's probably different in other countries, but it definitely is in England.
But is that
sure.
because we're not, through comprehensive schools and elsewhere, giving people full access to it?
It's not as accessible, and the same for women. If it's not as accessible for boys from certain backgrounds, then it's not as accessible for women. How can you ever expect to get those boys in the men's game and those women in the women's game?
No, I was very struck, the London Olympics, which was a tremendous success.
Huge.
And when you looked at the medal tallies, by the way, John Major didn't get much right in life, but I do think lottery money going towards sport development and academies really did make a difference, a huge difference. So we'll credit him with that. If nothing else, we'll credit him with that. But it was interesting, if you looked at that Olympics and the one afterwards, that 60% of our gold medal winners, male and female, had been privately educated.
Yeah.
And I feel there is a big class divide in terms of sport and opportunity, and I'd love to see that levelled up.